We've done the hard work of freedom.
And so he was focusing attention there, but there were 21 low-intensity conflicts going that the CIA was a major participant in, and the only one that got any remarkable coverage in the peace community or the press was Nicaragua, and it was by no means the biggest in terms of money or in terms of lives lost.
And tonight, we lead the world in facing down a threat to decency and humanity.
But we have not created a force, or government, or movement, or anything that believes in anything to step into the vacuum. I debated, or I thought I was going to debate an Afghani professor at the World Affairs Conference in Boulder last year, because he was paid working for the VOA and U.S. propaganda arm, so I presumed he was bought and paid for. And he kept telling me, just let me finish my sentence, so to speak. And I did. And what he said is what the powers have done is condemned Afghanistan to eternal violence and conflict.
Yes, it looks like it's going to be horrible.
What is at stake is more than one small country. It is a big idea, a new world order, where diverse nations are drawn together in common cause.
What we've been doing in Afghanistan is just pure and simple shotgun destabilization, funding anybody that's got a group, giving them arms through Pakistan, every kind of group, as you say, the Lebanization, so that now we've won in the sense that Reagan is crowing and Turner is crowing and Carter is crowing. You heard that.
To achieve the universal aspirations of mankind, peace.
Such a complex thing, but it seems everywhere you look, there are certain things going on.
And security.
The CIA and the mafia, and there were drugs that were being run back into the United States. There were illegal arms being procured and sent to the Contras, as well as to Iran.
And Iraq, as we now know.
And Iraq.
Freedom.
So you find a connecting thread here of arms to the Middle East and savings and loans. And Bush's office was directly involved in keeping this Sunrise Savings open and was lending money to John Riddle.
It seems like...
and the rule of law.
Now, with the Vaseline president, we're going to have a situation working where we may not have that infusion of energy from the White House, from the Congress, giving us the ammunition for our debates and rallies and a rallying point for the Peace Corps.
Such is a world worthy of our struggle.
Trying to boost his poll points. Well, when it becomes that transparent that mainstream columnists, even of your own persuasion, are saying it's manipulation, it doesn't work on the American people as well anymore. So my inclination is it will not be a foreign policy crisis, that they will develop a domestic crisis that will launch George Bush, that it will revolve around environmental extremists, eco-terrorists, who will be people who have either been manipulated by them or are them to commit some act or series of acts that terrify the nation, requiring a police state response in a limited fashion that can be lifted off after 5 or 6 weeks.
This one will drive you absolutely mad.
In fact, by discussing Walter Mischer, who is a Houston banker and power broker, as a major player in this whole SNL scam. Can you tell a little bit about him and what role he actually played in this scenario?
Yeah, Walter Mischer was at the very center of the Houston business connections that you take all these SNLs and you start tracking back where the money goes, and you find Mischer and his friends. Mischer was what we call a hyphenated Texan, banker, hyphenated developer, and there's probably a few other hyphens in there too. Political power broker. He controlled politicians on all levels. Mischer basically told the Houston developers who they were going to donate political campaign money to. Misher had the third largest bank in Houston, Allied Bank, and he used Allied Bank to finance many different things, including some of the dirtiest savings and loans in Houston, like Continental Savings, Mainland Savings, and some others. And in fact, Misher knew that the S&Ls were going down the tubes in the early 80s because he sold a savings and loan he had, Ben Franklin Savings, that at one time had belonged to Lloyd Benson's company. He also ordered all the S&L capital stock loans out of Allied in 82, 83, so that when these S&Ls failed, he wouldn't be caught holding the bag. And in turn, he had many savings and loans helping he and his bank out indirectly. At one time, Mainland Savings in Houston bought a $20 million loan that Allied held on an oil company. It was in bankruptcy. And a later investigation showed that Mainland lost at least $14 million on this. There was no hope of repaying, and Mainland just did it as a favor to Allied. The CEO of Mainland had his Mainland stock financed at Allied Bank and was a good friend of Walter Misher.
And what sort of political friends did Walter Misher have? Who were his main?
Longtime friend of James A. Baker III, White House Chief of Staff, former Treasury Secretary, former Secretary of State, George Bush's best friend. When Mainland failed, James Baker's old law firm, Andrews and Kurth in Houston, was brought in by the feds to investigate the failure and file a lawsuit against the officers and directors to try to recover the lost money. Andrews and Kurth investigated, actually drew up a lawsuit, a petition, but was never filed. It was stopped at the top layers of Andrews Kurth and the federal government. And as a result, no lawsuit was ever filed against Raymond Hill, the Mainland CEO, and no money was ever recovered. No indictments have ever been filed against anybody in the failure of Mainland Savings. Okay, so here we have this S&L. It's wired in to Walter Misher and James Baker. In the summer of 1985, James Baker went before a Senate Finance Committee as Treasury Secretary and told them that there was nothing to worry about in the S&Ls. Everything was wonderful and fine and nothing bad was going to happen. At the very same time, Mainland Savings was entering into a $68 million land deal with Adnan Khashoggi. And it's the way that, of course, Oliver North and William Casey, it's the way that George Bush, the way they like to do things. I mean, North testified before Congress that what William Casey was looking for, trying to set up, was a self-sustaining, off-the-shelf, self-financing covert operation. And here we had it. We see it in operation with the savings and loan money that ultimately came from the American taxpayer. So, Khashoggi wasn't out any money. The Iranians and Israelis really weren't out any money. It came from the American taxpayers. Incredible.
Now, in so much of what we've talked about previously on Alternative Views and in a lot of the news stories that you would read, they would mainly focus on the savings and loans themselves and all these wheelers and dealers like Don Dixon up in Burnham Savings or Charles Keating and all of that. But we're talking about a stratum above that, those people, aren't we?
Oh, definitely. I think Dixon and Keating and all the others, Ed McBurney, Jarrett Woods, Tyrell Barker, were just front men. I mean, they were cutouts, basically. And if you look at how much money they got, I call them 1 or 2 percenters. Dixon got maybe, $20 million out of Vernon? I mean, he himself. And Vernon is costing taxpayers over $1 billion. Keating got about $40 million. And Lincoln Savings is costing taxpayers $2 billion. So you can see you're getting 1 or 2%. And it's a classic front man setup. And the people that you have to, who's really getting this money, and you start scratching and digging, you find that you're in another stratum, as you say, of businessmen who are connected to the politicians very strongly. Of course, Keating had strong connections too, but if you look at who got the money out of Lincoln, you find John Connally and Ben Barnes getting close to $100 million. You find a little bank in Paris called Saudi European.
Paris, Texas.
Paris, no, actually Paris, France.
Paris, France.
Yes, it connects into the BCCI.
Oh, I see.
And Keating was investing money in that. And you start scratching and digging, and you find even bigger players than Keating behind this.
So then the
trying to boost his poll points. Well, when it becomes that transparent that mainstream columnists, even of your own persuasion, are saying it's manipulation, it doesn't work on the American people as well anymore. So my inclination is it will not be a foreign policy crisis, that they will develop a domestic crisis that will launch George Bush, that it will revolve around environmental extremists, eco-terrorists, who will be people who have either been manipulated by them or are them to commit some act or series of acts that terrify the nation, requiring a police state response in a limited fashion that can be lifted off after 5 or 6 weeks.
United States. I think that there was a substantial shadow government trying to run foreign affairs of the United States.
In any other country, it would have been called a coup. And they seem to have gotten away with it.
I'd hate to think, as many of my colleagues here have already expressed themselves, that in the process, we have shredded our own democratic fabric. These are modern-day pirates, these guys. They have escaped, essentially, the control of national governments, but they're available for use by national governments. Sometimes they move under color of, and defend themselves as advancing U.S. national interests in this. But I think that's very secondary with these guys. They're out to make a buck. I did do it. I am not, as I said in my statement, at all ashamed of any of the things that I did. I was given a mission, and I tried to carry it out.
If they ever went after Clinton for that, he has a great response he could make that may or may not convince the people. And that is, as governor of the state of Arkansas, what I found was a major drug smuggling operation run by the United States government as part of the Contra operation. Well, everybody seemed to know about it. What was I supposed to do? If I had gone public and exposed this operation, I would have been attacked for damaging national security and treason and whatever else. And who would have believed me that it was George Bush's team that was smuggling narcotics into this country? So he could handle it that way. But he has that little cloud hanging around, and there's BCCI money, BCCI connections with Clinton that is hanging around like another cloud. I mean, this is not one of my favorite elections.
It's a shadowy international bank linked to terrorists, drug runners, and dictators. The bank is closed now, but it had operated in some 62 countries, and its legacy is shaking world capitals. The bank's shady dealings were first exposed on this program almost 3 years ago by the investigative team of Brian Ross and producer Ira Silverman. Brian is with us now from Atlanta. Brian, how can one bank cause so much trouble in so many countries?
Well, Faith, the collapse of BCCI has confirmed what many investigators suspected for several years, that this bank was, without a doubt, the world's dirtiest bank, and that wherever it went, its way of doing business was corruption, deceit, and fraud. Now, with almost $5 billion missing, the BCCI scandal